Etak should not have survived. For 4 days, the Inuit caribou hunter was stuck on the Arctic tundra, all alone in a brutal winter storm. Temperatures hit -50. Ernie suffered severe frostbite on both hands. He was blinded in one eye. But somehow, miraculously, Ernie did survive.
I had a big breath, went back to my life.
I'm Editor-in-Chief Alex Robinson, and today I'm talking to our news editor Dak Collins, who interviewed Ernie about this incredible tale of survival. So, this story that you wrote about Ernie Etak, how did you go about getting a hold of him in the first place?
Yeah, short answer is Facebook. I had seen this headline. We did kind of a news brief on this crazy survival story that I saw in a Canadian newspaper. This would have been January 13th. It was a Thursday morning. And I sent him a message right away, basically asking if I could interview him for a story. I think he sent me a message back about an hour later saying, "Sounds good, thank you."
And when you talked to him, where was he?
So Ernie was still sort of in a hospital setting. He was with his wife. She answered the phone initially and held up the phone while we were talking. He was still recovering from a pretty major surgery. Both hands above the wrist were amputated at a hospital in Winnipeg. So they were both staying at that time a place called the Kivalik Inuit Center in Winnipeg, Manitoba, which is basically kind of like a boarding house, place for natives to stay who are from that part of Canada, the Kivalik region, who are undergoing medical treatment or, for various reasons, but it's basically an extension of the hospital. And he was actually getting ready to meet with a specialist that afternoon so they could start fitting him for prosthetics.
So kind of going back to the beginning here, how did Ernie end up getting caught in this big blizzard in the first place?
The way he tells it, it was just another day in the life. This guy lived his whole life in this small native village in Arkvayat. We're talking like the northernmost part of Canada. This is like the Arctic Rim. He's on the west side of Hudson Bay. He's a native modern day subsistence hunter, has lived his whole life there. So for him, kind of hopping on a snowmobile and going out to hunt caribou in late November was just that's how he puts food on the table. That's how he feeds his family. He's got a wife and 2 kids, and I know he also shares with the rest of the village. So, yeah, again, just kind of another day in the life.
Okay, so, he kind of goes out. He's on a caribou hunt. Sounds like just going out for kind of a day trip. Where do things start to go wrong?
Yeah, so like you said, it was just a day trip. He goes hunting with friends and family occasionally, but this was a solo mission. Keeping in mind that it gets dark around 3 p.m. that time of year in that part of Canada. He had left home that morning and was planning to be back at dark. So he basically just took all his hunting gear, his bare essentials, hopped on a snowmobile, headed west from the village. He had seen a group of 5 caribou and was following them on his snowmobile. Kept following them kind of throughout the middle of the day. Couldn't get close enough for a clean shot.
I saw a caribou trail and I started following, and before dark, I lost him.
And finally turned around toward home when it was starting to get dark. He told me he's guessing 50 miles from the village. So he makes it about halfway back. Snowmobile breaks down. He said he had a spark plug with him, a spare plug. He swapped it out, got the machine running for a little while, but it died again pretty soon after. He tries pull starting it. Couldn't get it to run. He pretty much gives up on it. At this point, he was saying he could pretty much see the lights of the village. So again, we're picturing like a very flat tundra. He's probably still 20 miles away, maybe a little less, but he just kind of did, I think, what he thought was best. It was lightly snowing, kind of foggy, but pretty typical late November weather. And he grabbed his sled with just his basic hunting gear. He's got a rifle. He's got an extra parka. He's got a can of gas, that sort of thing. So he basically takes all his gear and ties it around his waist, starts walking towards home. I think he's just thinking, I'll just keep walking until I get home. Walk through the night, just walk in a straight line towards where he last saw the lights. And he was walking in a straight line until he started to hear ice cracking under his boots.
I hear the crack of ice and open water, getting open water.
Obviously, that only means one thing, that the whatever body of water he was standing on was starting to open up, so he changed course.
I look around, I see a big rock on my left, and I quit running and sleep there for a couple hours near the big rock. The weather was nice, calm, and snowing.
And at this point, it's been a full day. It's well after dark, and he's pretty tired, so he kind of snuggles up next to that rock, and without thinking much of it, he just kind of sat down and fell asleep.
So things not going well, exactly, but also like not really dire straits yet. He's an experienced hunter. He's used to life on the tundra. So like long walk home through the dark, but sounds like, you know, he's not really feeling threatened at this point. When he wakes up from his nap, you know, I'm guessing it's now dark. What does he find when he wakes up?
Well, believe it or not, from what he told me, the first thing he sees is a Wolverine. And he says this so casually, like he just wakes up and like, oh yeah, this thing was just chewing on my boot, you know? He did say it was pretty angry, but when are they not angry, right? So yeah, he just mentions this very casually. He's just woken up by a Wolverine chewing on his boot. And he's kind of groggy, very confused, grabs the closest thing he has to a flashlight in his pocket, which is a lighter. He's a smoker. And so he kind of is able to get the lighter out of his pocket, somehow kind of flicks it, which is enough to scare the Wolverine away. The Wolverine runs off. And at this point, he fully realizes that the weather has really taken a turn for the worse. You know, it's gone from lightly snowing to full-on snowstorm. We've got high winds. He's already sort of in a whiteout situation. So we're talking, full-on blizzard at this point.
Okay, so now starting to feel a little more dire straits, right? Like this is heading toward full-on survival situation. So what does Ernie do next?
Exactly. That's kind of where he's at right now. He's got no GPS, no phone, no tent, no food. There's also obviously no trees anywhere. So he does have the presence of mind to realize that, you know, the snowmobile is probably the safest place he can be right now. There's no way he's going to just walk in circles in a whiteout. So he grabs his sled, full of the minimal gear he had with him. He's able to find his footprints, hustles all the way back to the snowmobile, gets back there and decides to basically find a way to hunker down for the night. The way he tells it, you know, he got back to his snowmobile, his mind's on shelter, so he does what he grew up learning to do to, you know, build an igloo. He immediately starts piling up snow. You can picture the wind just keeps whipping it away. Every time he gets a good pile of snow, he loses it.
I was going to build a snow house igloo, but was so strong wind and my caribou mitts fly away from the strong wind and I had no more mitts.
And at some point, he sets his mittens down. Poof, gone, blown away, you know. So now he's barehanded. So next option, right? He's looking at his sled full of gear. He does have a rolled up tarp there. He gets the tarp, a few pieces of cord, and basically, the way he describes it, sort of builds a little lean-to off the side of his snowmobile.
I tied my tarp to my sled and snowmobile was not flying away from the strong wind. And I use my tarp to cover up my hands. It was so cold.
Pulls the plastic sled underneath, and then he curls up, you know, essentially goes into the fetal position, where he, as he puts it, lays down to die, which, as we know, he didn't.
Okay, so he gets to a snowmobile, the plan's to hunker down. You know, details from here, it feels like get a little foggy. You know, listening to the interviews that you have done with Ernie, like there's a little bit of a language barrier, but also, you know, what Ernie undergoes in the next few days are incredibly traumatic just to the human mind and body. So it sounds like he will suffer from hypothermia, and, you know, that would just make recounting exactly what happened a real challenge for anyone. So as best as you can glean from Ernie's, you know, kind of own telling, you know, does he get hypothermia? What happens to him while he's just hunkered down in this blizzard?
You're definitely right about that. This is where the story starts to get kind of fuzzy. His native language is Inuktitut. So he speaks good English, but when we're talking like deep level conversation about, you know, what's going on through your mind, what was this experience like? It was hard to really pull a lot of details out of him. And like you say, it was a very traumatic ordeal. We do know that his hands were cold enough to be so frostbitten that they were beyond saving. You know, at this point when we're on the phone, he has no hands. He was also had regained vision in his left eye, but he was blind in his left eye for a while after the incident. So yeah, I mean, as someone asking him these questions, I was kind of cautiously prodding him because I don't know how much I want him to relive this experience and how much he wants to really get into it. But, as reporters are wont to do, I kept asking questions about what was going on through his mind, what this experience must have been like. And his basic response, this is something that he says over and over again in the interviews I recorded with him, is, I died for 5 days. He kept saying it over and over.
In blizzard for 5 days and -50, and I died for 5 days.
Looking back on it, you never want to assume anything when you're having these sort of conversations, but I think it's pretty safe to say that he was hypothermic at some point. If his hands were so frostbitten that they had to be pretty much immediately removed, he had to have been very, very, very cold. We're talking 3+ days of this. This is like 90, 100 miles an hour of wind, way, way, way below zero. Seriously cold. So, pretty safe to say that he was hypothermic, even if it wasn't clinically diagnosed at the time.
Yeah, of course. And in your reporting, around this story, you ended up talking to a hypothermia researcher, right? To kind of get an idea of how someone can survive this, and then also to gain a little perspective on Ernie's take of it, which is just he died.
Yeah, I started thinking more about it. I started doing a little bit of research, and I realized pretty quickly after reading a couple sources, mostly medical textbooks online, that there is such a thing as hypothermic coma, and that as the body's core temperature drops, brain functioning deteriorates. So that started to kind of add up in my mind, okay, this is, what are we talking about? Dead? Is this figurative? Is this, how real is this description? And I started to realize that it kind of makes sense if from his perspective, he basically, for lack of a better word, goes brain dead. I did a quick Google of probably something like the foremost hypothermia expert. And the first thing that came up was these videos from a Discovery Channel series. This was a while back, of this guy who purposely skis into a frozen lake in Canada, hangs out for a while on camera, describing himself getting hypothermic.
What seems like a deadly situation is in fact a controlled demonstration of how to survive after falling into a frozen lake.
Get to some area where you can get some stability. And just let the gasping, it'll die down after about a minute. What happens when you get really cold, cold skin starts a cold shock response, which gets you first start gasping and hyperventilating and breathing way more than you need to. And that's really bad if your head goes under the water when you gasp the first time. And you drown immediately.
And then he gets himself out with no help. He kind of, this is basically a pretty cool tutorial worth checking out, by the way, if you're an ice fisherman or anybody who likes spending time on the ice. But he kind of goes through the whole process of getting out of the ice, making a little shelter in the woods for himself, building a fire. So yeah, really interesting guy. Some other journalists have called him Professor Popsicle.
I've been hypothermic 40 times, mostly for studies that we've done.
This is Dr. Gordon Giesbrecht, a professor at the University of Manitoba and one of the world's leading experts on hypothermia.
If you become moderately hypothermic, you could have amnesia. I actually have amnesia from the coldest experiment we ever did.
And basically the way he describes it is kind of the same way that the medical textbook did, which is basically as your body's core temperature drops, brain function deteriorates.
Then your recollection of what happened can be based on dreams.
That dream element is really interesting because Ernie did tell you about some of his dreams, right, that he had during this time.
He did. He wasn't super specific, but they did have a very spiritual, I guess you could say, element to them.
I saw white human and black human, some kind of human surrounding me, and I hear a gospel song.
I distinctly remember him saying, I see white humans and black humans standing around me. I heard angels singing gospel songs. And so, yeah, he's just kind of in this dream death state for we don't know how long.
We'll be right back after the break. Okay, so how does he ever get out of this? How does he come back to life?
The way he tells it, he just had a big breath and woke up.
I had a big breath went back to my life, and I was so happy because I went back to my life.
We do know by looking at the weather history that the blizzard did break on that fourth night. So by the fifth day, this would have been December 2nd. He left on November 28th. We know that the storm broke, the blizzard ended, the sun came out in a big way. And so I brought this up with Dr. Giesbrick too. We kind of realized that, I don't want to say he snapped out of it, but I think the effect of the sun on his little tarp shelter warming up was enough to kind of at least get his brain going again, kind of get him out of this quasi-death dream state. And yeah, he comes to.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, we kind of just have to infer, right? Because Ernie is the only one there experiencing it, and his experience is simply that he died and then he came back to life.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so he wakes up, has this big breath, sun is shining. Now what happens? Does he, he's still some 20 miles from his village or more. Can he walk? Does he get rescued? How is he able to survive?
Well, what we can infer is that he did leave because he was not found underneath the tarp by the snowmobile. And the way he tells it, he starts to sit up and has a very strong kind of claustrophobic feeling. He's sort of trapped underneath this tarp. And he immediately realizes that the skin on his hands is frozen, stuck completely to the fabric, and he can't feel his hands. They're very heavy. There's nothing he can do. He's got a pocket knife on him, but there's obviously no way he's going to be able to get a hold of that. He sort of just rocks his body back and forth, keeps rocking back and forth until he can sort of tear this tarp enough, which his hands are stuck to, enough that he can get up out of this little situation that he's in. So he stands up, his hands, there's tarp still hanging from them, gets up, starts walking towards home.
So nice weather, and I walk home, and 1 hour later on my back, 2 snowmobiles came by search and rescue, bring me home.
At some point on his walk, he could no longer take another step. His body is breaking down on him, so he passes out. He hits the deck, lands on his back. He's found there by the local search and rescue crew. This is the local unit out of Arkvayat, which is, from what I understand, at least a couple people that he knows. We're talking a very small village here. So they've been looking for him the whole time. He's laying there on his back. They're able to at least get him up. I don't know how conscious he was at this point, but they're at least able to get him on a sled and get him wrapped up in some blankets and, basically tow him back to the medical clinic there in the village. From there, he's pretty much immediately medevaced to Winnipeg. They realize that this case is, this is way out of their abilities with the state he's in. So, yeah, they get him on a helicopter. He goes straight to a hospital in Winnipeg, where he pretty much immediately goes into the rewarming process, and soon after goes into surgery where they amputate both hands above the wrists.
The big question, which I know may be unanswerable, but I just have to ask anyways. People freeze to death in much less severe weather than this over much shorter duration. We're talking negative 50 degrees. That's incredible. Many people have never experienced that type of weather, even for a moment, with full gear. I mean, that is about as brutal of weather as humans can exist in. So how is it that Ernie didn't just freeze to death?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, and it's one that we won't ever really totally completely know. But we can think about it, the things we know about the human body. And honestly, talking with Dr. Giesbrick helped me wrap my head around this story, which is call it what you will or what you want, sort of a miracle. Yeah, it's truly amazing. So for one, he's obviously a lot more accustomed to the cold than you or I are. I'm speaking for myself from Texas. It's not the first time he's in a blizzard, and the human body does have the ability to adapt to its environment. So I think as someone who grew up in that area, he's obviously going to stand a lot better chance at surviving than any of us would if we were thrown into that situation. Because like you said, there's been a lot of people who have died from hypothermia in a lot less intense circumstances. So there is that. I think the other determining factor, and this is something that Ernie explicitly has told me, and something that after talking with Dr. Giesbrecht, he kind of backs this up, is it really came down to what he was wearing. Without the tarp, probably wouldn't have made it. I mean, that was really a very crucial piece of modern gear that, gave him at least some sort of barrier from the elements. But he was wearing traditional native clothing. We're talking furs, animal hides. I think part of the outfit was bearded seal skins, but mostly we're talking caribou hides, other furs. So this is the same stuff that, they've been wearing for hundreds, thousands of years. And that's what he was dressed in. I mean, from his mittens to his boots to his, sunglasses, which are essentially made of a caribou antler with slits cut in the middle. And talking to Giesbrecht, they've done studies on this. They've looked at this sort of traditional fur clothing versus the synthetic stuff that Arctic explorers and we all wear when we're out recreating. And, while synthetics are definitely more breathable, they're definitely better suited for skiing, climbing, mountaineering, anything where you're, exerting a lot of energy, those work in that situation.
But most Inuit people they're not tooling around pulling sleds for recreation or adventure. They're working to make a living. They're sitting on a snowmobile rather than skiing and pulling stuff. They're sitting still to hunt. And so that clothing is made for someone who is not doing much work and staying still. So that's perfect. That was the perfect clothing to protect them from dying of hypothermia. That didn't. It's not going to affect the parts of your body that are sticking out of that clothing, like your hands. And then, of course, when he lost his mitts, I mean, that he basically might as well cut his hand off right there.
Wow. How is Ernie doing now? When was the last time you talked to him?
Honestly, he's doing well. Ernie and I talk. When I say Ernie and I spoke, I always speak with his wife because she's there holding the phone for us so that we can talk. Probably a couple weeks ago now that I talked to him last. But they were back in their village, back in Arkvayat, and he's always willing to chat. And whenever I talk to him on the phone, he always seems very upbeat. I know that within the next month or so, he's going to try to go back to the hospital in Winnipeg to pick up his prosthetics, what he calls his steel hands. So that always kind of comes back into the conversation. I know he's really, really looking forward to that. And I know that they found his snowmobile. I think it was his cousin or another relative who came across his snowmobile. So they're planning to go retrieve that. And yeah, Ernie says that after he gets his steel hands on, he's going to get back to hunting again and living his life as he always has.
Yes, I can't wait to get my steel hand, so I will try to grab anything and still going hunting.
The Outdoor Life podcast is edited and produced by our senior deputy editor, Natalie Krebs. It's hosted by me, editor-in-chief Alex Robinson. Reporting for this story was done by our news editor, Dak Collins. Audio clips in this episode are from the Discovery Channel, the National Park Service, and freesound.org. Songs from this episode were composed by Cyril Baptiste, Gabrielle Charvet, Zach Lemon, Alexander Rudd, Harrison Black, Zeb Jameson, and Emerson Lee, all via APM Music.